Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Monash Software Systems and Cybersecurity Seminar. We are very happy to welcome Professor Anita Sarma from Oregon State University in the US. Professor Sarma is the Associate Head of Research in the School of Engineering, Electrical Engineering, and Computer Science. She received her PhD in Computer Science from the University of California, Irvine, and was a postdoctoral fellow at Carnegie Mellon University. Her research focuses on human factors in software development and how to design inclusive technology to help software developers. She has co-authored more than 100 conference and journal articles and has received numerous awards. She received the OSU Breaking Barriers Research Award in 2021 for her work in removing gender biases from software. She is also a co-director of GenderMax project. She is also a recipient of the NSF Career Award in 2013 and Google Inclusion Award in 2022. And today she will talk to us about designing for inclusivity. Thank you, Anita. The scene is yours.
Cool. Thank you, Mohammed, for the introduction. So, idea is like, how can we design or engineer inclusivity into your products? And some of you might be thinking, but how does inclusivity and software actually relate? Like, software is like an agnostic technology, right? And the answer is a lot. It is most software has some gender bias bugs embedded in it. And here's a concerned developer already working very hard to meet their deadlines, and they would like, you're kidding, like where, how can there be gender bias bugs in the software? And the answer is, it is in the software that you as your team are creating, as well as in the very tools that you use to create the software. So the concerned developer is still like, okay, maybe it is, but how much does it really matter? Is it really important? Do I need to focus on this, shift my focus from my current, whichever bug fix I'm doing? And the answer is yes, it actually matters a lot, because these inclusivity bugs are like a cognitive tax that a user pays every time they hit one of these bugs, right? And if it is that only one class of users are facing this bug, say for example, only one type of one variant of gender, then it causes a inequity. And even if social justice is not a concern that is a primary role for your job, it is still important to care about these inclusivity bugs, because addressing one underserved population segment can actually help everyone. Here is the classic idea of curb cuts from the field of human computer interaction. Long time back, people observed that those who were in wheelchair, veterans, had a really hard time crossing intersections. And from there came the idea of curb cuts, which are really a kind of a dip in the pavement, so wheelchairs can easily, get onto the road and cross the road. But then it had this additional benefit to all these other types of population that people didn't think about that the problem existed. For example, those who have those suitcases with rollerboards, those who have strollers for children, cyclists, people dragging hails of bay, right? So looking at the problems or needs of one underserved population, those with wheelchair, actually made this particular product, the sidewalks, much more inclusive of other population needs. And that's the idea of curb cuts. And how can we then put in the idea of curb cuts? How can we make software inclusive that actually helps software for everyone? So I'll tell you in this talk what to do. But before we go there, let me take a brief moment to say what we should not do, right? Shrink it and pink it is not a strategy that works. It's and adding the pink tax is also not worth it. Dell introduced this pink laptops in 2009. They had this nice little pink cover, and along with it came a companion website that was all about writing recipes. How long do you think that website stayed up? This is in 2009. This is pre-Twitter. If you have any answers, you can put in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and say, how long do you think it took? Let's see, there's a chat here.
6 months.
6 months, okay. Guess lower.
3 months.
3 months. Anybody else apart from Mohammed?
Kashume says 1 month in the chat.
1 month, all right. It's getting better. It took 20 minutes. And remember, this is pre-Twitter, or like X, formerly known as Twitter. There was just so much of backlash because like, oh, all I can use my pink laptop is to write this new recipe, right? That was so much stereotype. Where's my cursor? Hold on here. Yes. And have you heard of the Bic for her? So there is this pen and there's a little bit of cushion in it, and some of them have sparkles, right? So this was an Ellen DeGeneres, is a American comedian. She has chat shows, and she was like, "Oh, my poor woman arms! I could never write a letter before this big pen came into being," right? So this is incredibly rude because one, it is kind of stereotyping, and it is just showing that they're trying to make money of this one class of people, right? It's just a marketing gimmick. Plus, all these pink products have this pink tax. They were actually more expensive than the counter products, that the regular products. But the idea is that nobody is typical, right? We do not want to break up the world into typical men versus women, because there is no binary. There's like a whole spectrum of individual differences that exist. And even if you were trying to make separate product lines for separate types of people, there's just so many dimensions. You cannot just do it, right? So what we need to focus on is not dividing up the population into pinks and blue people, but more about debugging the software so that the software works for everyone involved. And that's what we would like to do with the talk I'm going to talk about, designing inclusion, is like, how can we find these inclusivity bugs that lurk in the software? One approach we have been working with is GenderMax. It's a systematic inclusivity debugging method where, using some inspections like cognitive walkthrough or just looking at walking through what your software does, you can find where the inclusivity bugs are. It's like testing. You find where the problem is, which part of the UI is the concern, that is like fault localization, and then how do you fix it? GenderMax stands for Gender Inclusiveness Magnifier. And the process is, you're finding these inclusivity bugs embedded in your product. And the scope is any time a human is sitting in front of the computer and trying to problem solve, right? It could be a development editor, someone writing the program. It could be any kind of software tools, websites, even documentation. What GenderMax does, it takes 5 cognitive facets or cognitive styles or problem solving styles, I will call them as cognitive facets, and embeds these facets into personas. And then it has a modified cognitive walkthrough, which we call gender specialized cognitive walkthrough, that takes these facets that are embedded into the persona to do this walkthrough of your software. There are 3 customizable personas: Abby here, Pat, and Tim. And you can see they are gendered persona with multiple pictures from different dimensions. These GenderMax personas are representative of a range of users, but mainly from the perspective of these 5 cognitive facets. First is motivations of why someone is going to use your software, why someone is going to use certain features of your software, how someone processes information that is new, their self-confidence in using technology and moving forward if some bugs appear or some problems occur, their learning style. Do they just tinker around and find information, or do they like to have more process-oriented information? And how risk-averse they are in trying out new software features. Each of these 5 facets are then embedded into the persona. It's a lot of information on this. I don't want you to read it, but the first thing to think about it is that it all fits into one page. Oops, sorry. Anything above this line is customizable, right? You can change the name, you can change the pictures. We have multiple pictures, their background, skills, anything that you want to customize according to your domain, according to your tool, go ahead. Things below this black line are the facets, and these are not changeable. There is some space here that you can change your pronouns if you want to, based on whatever persona characteristics you're picking. But these are the 5 facets that are fixed. Let's pick one facet, attitude towards risk. This facet says that Abby, this particular person I'm talking about, rarely has any spare time, so she's risk averse about using unfamiliar technology. She's pretty fine with using familiar technology, but anything that's new and that takes extra time to figure it out, she doesn't have the time. She doesn't do that, right? Think about it. You have a deadline coming up. For example, I don't know how many in our funding agency called National Science Foundation, we have to put up our bio, like CV. And there is an online version where if you put in all the papers up, it can generate the PDF that needed. But there is also the fillable PDF that you can modify, which is very crafty. It takes lots of time to just fill it up. It's error prone, but it is PDF fillable that I know how to do it. It seems much easier to do that than learn this new, completely new environment tooling, right? So I continue using a more onerous workflow just because I know it and I just don't want to spend the time to learn this new system. So that's an example of attitude towards risk averseness. So here is one data point. So one thing too, I did not mention, these 5 facets that we have picked up into the persona are all backed by 5 empirical studies, independent empirical studies that found statistical differences in how men and women problem solved, right? So these were 5 facets where there are statistical significance in the differences. Here is one such study, and this was data that was self-reported, and in this data we only had data from men and women. It was just binary data. So the first thing you see is over here on the left hand side are those who selected themselves to be more risk tolerant, and on the right side was more risk averse. Blue is men bars and yellow is women. First thing to note is more women than men tend to be risk averse, right? You see this line. And more men tend to be risk tolerant. It is the role or job of the TIM persona to look after all this risk tolerant people, and it is the job of Abby to look after these risk averse people, and then we have the Pats who are kind of for the middle person. Now there's amazing animation here, right? So anything to the left of the black line are basically risk tolerant people. Now imagine what happens if the tools that are being created are by the TIMs for the TIMs, right? If the tools are created by people who are like TIMs, who are risk tolerant, they leave behind a large segment of the population. Almost 3/4 of the Abbies are left behind, and about half of the, 3/4 of women who are Abbies are left behind there. And actually about 50% of men are also going to be left behind, right? And that's why this cognitive bias bugs also become gender bias bugs, because of the distribution of the population of men and women in how they do problem solving. Any questions on this? All right.
No questions so far in the chat.
Cool. So one thing to note again is this facets depends on individuals and situations, right? So GenderMax is not about essentialism. So we have seen the distribution, but we do not make an assertion that men are like Tims and women are like Abby, right? Everybody could be in different places, right? Gender is kind of like a spectrum. So what we have is these 5 facets are also arranged in a spectrum, motivated to use a software because of the task at hand versus motivated to use the software because technology is fun. So we have 2 ends of the spectrum, and the Abbies are at one end of the spectrum and Tims are at the other end of the spectrum. And you can see individuals can be some Tims, some Abbies. So I am a total Abby in learning new tools. I do not want to learn yet another communication tool like, Discord, for example. I have Slack, Skype, WhatsApp, and whatnot. I do not want to learn yet another social media platform. So I'm an Abby, but I'm a very selective information processor. What selective information processor is, they take this first piece of actionable information and you work on it. Whereas comprehensive, you take all the information needed for a task and then work on it, right? I'm kind of in between with self-efficacy. I am risk averse, as I already told. I am more tinkering, but it really depends on the situation. Is if it is, I have plenty of time, it is something more joyful, I can tinker and figure it out. If I'm doing something that is, again, matches kind of with risk, if I'm doing something for, say, a proposal submission or something with open source that it can go public, I do not like to tinker and poke around. I would rather find information. The other thing I wanted to talk about was I forgot what I was going to talk about. So there are these 5 facets, and then people can be split anyways, and it is also situational. So the goal of GenderMag is kind of seeing how to help both on the spectrum, right? And it's also to note that it's not that one style is bad and the other style is good. It's just both styles need to be supported. For example, in selective information processing style, it works pretty well for me most of the time because I can get things quickly done. I get some small piece of information, I work on it. But sometimes it can backfire. For example, I was chairing a conference, and at that conference, I had to set up this a website called Easy Chair or Hot CRP. I don't know which one it was. And then there was this whole set of instructions that there were, which I did one step after the other. I was taking one instruction, doing it. 40 minutes into this big email, there was this thing. Oh, by the way, if you want the conference managers to set up this website, it'll be actually better. But if you want to do it yourself, you can do it. Here's another set of 10 instructions you have to follow if you do it yourself, right? Had I read the whole information beforehand, I would have saved myself a lot of work. So it's just a difference in style. So the job is to support both ends of the spectrum so that people can just work on the styles that makes the most sense to them. So now that we understand what facets are and what their spectrum is, how does GenderMax actually work? The first job you do is you take a persona you're interested in, say Abby. We always say it's better to start with the Abby persona because more likely than not, the software that you have out there are more supportive of the Tim's cognitive styles than Abby's. So you can find more bugs by using Abby. But a good rule is to use Abby first and then Tim to make sure that you're not, getting one persona, fixing it, and then might be impeding another persona. So you pick a persona, and then you pick a use case or scenario in a tool that you want to use. So here is a student's example from our HCI class. This is an augmented physical bookstore. And you kind of give them like this use case, like, okay, so this particular persona, Abby, now her goal is to find science fiction books. And then based on this particular use case, you walk through the intended set of sub goals and actions that you as a software designer are thinking about. So let's say in this particular case, the student team, so it's always the team that is designed the software, comes up and says, what would they think the user would be doing, right? So what they thought was, as a first step to find science fiction books, a user would look at the bookstore map. Then as part of the cognitive walkthrough, you say, Will, your persona, in this case it's Abby, would have she formed this sub-goal? And usually have a team. We recommend at least 3 to 4 people. Too many makes it very hard. Too many thoughts, too many conversations. Too few means you don't get enough perspective. So 3 to 4 seems to be like the good number to have a good round of discussion. And the answer could be yes, no, or maybe, right? And we can be inclusive. You don't have to come to a consensus. So let's suppose, somebody says no, and then or maybe, and you ask like, why? Why would Abby not have formed the sub-goal? And you have to think about those 5 facets, right? So we have the persona right in front of you looking at the facets and when you answer these questions. And now you can consider like, what is Abby's motivations? She uses software features if it is required for the task, right? So here's find science fiction books. Would she think that she has to look at the map to get to the science fiction book? Maybe she'll talk to someone, right? So you discuss like why this particular facet, maybe because of this facet, Abby will not do this task. Whatever is the decision, yes, no, maybe, you write it down in a form, and then we shove this particular sub goal into Abby's head because we need to move forward. Next, we say, okay, given this sub goal, what should Abby be doing? Like, what should she use with her fingers on the interface? And here, the team said there is this tiny little purple box here which says browse off, right? So the team said the way to go look at the map is use the browse off button so that the map comes up. So now you ask these questions again. Will Abby know what to do at this stage? Yes, no, maybe, and why? So if we consider Abby's facet, one particular thing is learning style. She doesn't like tinkering. So given that she doesn't like tinkering, would Abby have clicked on something just to see what browse off would mean? Because it doesn't say she wants to look at the map. There's nothing about map. She would have to click on this to find out, hey, browse off leads to a map. So maybe she will not click on that. But then we take Abby's fingers and click on that because we need to move forward. And then the question comes, next question 2 is, if the action was performed, would Abby see progress being made towards her sub-goal? And again, you can say yes, no, maybe, or why. And depending on what new screen loads up, you can see if Abby is making progress using the map towards finding science fiction books, right? It depends on the interface. So basically what you do, you take this entire scenario or use case, break it down into sub-goals, the different steps they have to take, and actual interface actions. And for each of these, you have a sub-goal question, an action, pre-action, and post-action questions. And you are asking questions, and then you're calculating yes, no, maybe. So at the end of the session, you're kind of debriefing and calculating. So the first thing you calculate is this bias bug score, right? How many of the questions you asked, they were yes, that means there was no bugs. How many of them there was a no or a maybe answer, and you collect them. If there are one no, multiple maybes is still a no/maybe. And if there was a inclusivity or a facet involved. If it was just Abby wouldn't do it because the font was not clear, then it's a general usability bug. But if a facet was attached to this particular no or maybe, then we call it an inclusivity bug, because the problem that Abby or whichever persona you have was facing was because of this particular facet, right? So at the end, you basically have an inclusivity bug report. And then what you could do is you kind of debrief for insights and actionable next steps, how you're going to fix it, how you're going to prioritize it. So we have done this with the OSU, Oregon State University IT team, on their software, Canvas. We use that on a conference website. This was an ICSI website, as well as in a peer production site, which was a Wikimedia, right? And we have found, we have been doing GenderMag evaluations, helping GenderMag evaluations for 10 years almost now. And we have found these bugs to lurk in every which domain we have looked at. Open source projects, programming environments, IDEs, spreadsheets, e-learning, Canvas, robots, even basic documentation and website, right? Most every domain where a human has to interact, there are some of these inclusivity bugs embedded. They can range from very low, we have the lowest is 12%, to high, in this case with 100%. So this is data from 17 teams where we were facilitating GenderMag evaluations. And so far, none of the teams that we have looked at has ever found a 0%, right? 12% is the lowest, and it's pretty darn good. The 100% is a sad story, but actually it was good because in this case, they were using paper prototypes, so they could very easily fix it, right? So you do not have to wait till your product is designed and you have everything implemented. You can do a cognitive walkthrough using the GenderMag personas right at the earliest stages, at the paper prototyping stage. So next we will go into...
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Have you seen or have you noticed any kind of particular domains where the biases were more pervasive than the others? Like kind of a particular domain that were kind of standing out in terms of having high biases?
It really depends on which teams we had looked at, but my understanding is open source or like high tech software has more. It's again like, it's kind of going back to software developers when they build for themselves, like open source. It just happens they are thinking much less about the end user. So GitHub, open source, but I have been more involved with that. So Margaret Burnett has been doing much more with teaching software, but I have found that where things are less having touch surface about end users, they have way more inclusivity biases because they are doing much less user studies and focus group research. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
So when you have like focused group and like more polished software, they do get a lot of more user base and they are able to find more of the bugs hiding because some people would like you find where the errors are, right? So it depends on how much testing, usability testing has been done and with what kind of backgrounds.
Yeah.
Less the usability testing, the more of these bugs sort of stay hidden.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's basically on my intuition. I don't have actual empirical data, just from what we have seen.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So now that we have talked about, why this is happening is because some problem solving style or cognitive facet is not supported. You know exactly where the problem is because you have looked at the actual interface level, right? Which action was the problem? Next comes what can we do to actually fix the problem, right? So fixing the inclusivity faults is like how we do bug fixing. So here, as I said, I have done quite a bit of work with open source. So I'll take an example of open source here. And we have done based on the content of the open source in GitHub, like the project itself, as well as the GitHub UI. For example, how to make a pull request is very confusing for first-time users, right? But I'm going to talk here about just the content and the I'm seeing there's a Q&A, so I'm just trying to see if there's a question here that needs answering. Oh, where can you find additional information? I would be happy to give you more information, but most of the data that you want to have is in the gendermax.org website. So, but if you're looking for specific things, I can totally talk to you offline or after this. So that was a question on the Q&A, more information. But okay, so back to this open source documentation. And so here the scenario is the users wants to contribute to project, and this is the contribute.md. A little bit of a background story of this particular project. We worked with a team, and the project is called Floss Coach, and it was especially set up to help with newcomers, right? So now take a few moments. I hope you can read it. Read what's in here. This is the how contribute.md starts. It says, how to set up a Ruby on Rails development environment. Hi, if you're going to contribute to Floss Coach, these are the steps to follow. Step 0, 1, 1.1.1. So what do you think? Is there any bug?
There are certainly typos.
Okay. Wait, what is a typo?
Instead of simple steps, it writes simple
okay.
steps.
Okay. So this is a perfect example of a typo. It's nothing with inclusivity. It's a typo.
Yeah.
All right. What do you think about inclusivity bugs? Is there anything that could be a problem with inclusion for newcomers to open source? And here are the 5 facets: information processing, learning style, motivations, risk aversion, self-efficacy. White people. Here is a little line I'll pop up. It says, steps may vary in case of Mac OS or Windows. So if I take a big step back, and I don't know how many of you know about open source, but one of the things with open source is it's public anything you do is out there. There is also a lot of talk about open source is very important for careers and just learning about technology, but many people might not have confidence to start doing with code. But there are so many other non-code types of contributions one can make. So when the team was looking at this, and they have now they did the GenderMag evaluation, and then they fixed it. The first thing they realized was motivations of the newcomer using this feature, using contribute.md. The contribute.md just assumed anybody who is going to come, they would know how they would want to set up the environment, the programming environment, right? This is the classic case where I was thinking the developers build this tool and they said, okay, somebody else would contribute code. But there are other ways open source can have contributions. So as this took a step back and thought about what is Abby's motivations, and when we created they created the persona, they were really looking for newcomers and expanding their project base, right? They wanted more contributors. So they were trying to be more welcoming to new contributors. So then they said, okay, contributing to Flaws Coach, you can have multiple ways. You can file an issue, you can find an issue, you can work on documentations. So the first thing they took at is like there are different types of contributions, right? The second thing, what they did was like when they were talking to with help us with code, there they talked about, okay, learning style, right? Not everyone is has self-confidence or risk averseness is low to set up the project by themselves, right? So here they said, okay, here are Linux, Mac. These are the instructions per open source. They separated it out just so that they know, like as the human, they don't want to just go try some steps and then feel it's not working. They said, okay, these are the specific steps for Linux, these are for Mac, and Windows is now currently unsupported, right? So they're giving enough information upfront about a particular open source, a particular operating system that you might want to use. So this is how they had like I think 6 bugs that they had found, inclusivity bugs, when they did the GenderMag, and then they went ahead and like figured out where the problem would be from the cognitive facets, and they fixed those. Then we said, okay, that's a great thing, but let's do a user study. So we had the previous version and then we had the fixed version. So we did a user study with 18 participants. It was a between subject. So 9 of them used the before version and 9 the after version. And those were the 4 user tasks, which were the 4 use cases or scenarios that the team had evaluated. So we said, okay, we'll give them the same scenarios or tasks to the end users who were participating. And I believe these were undergraduate students, so who did not know open source, but they knew programming well enough. And what we have done is for each, these are the 4, these are the 4 tasks. And then the bugs that the team, the inclusivity bugs that the team, the GenderMag evaluation that team had done, we kind of put in which of those bugs landed with which of these use cases. And if you can see in the original version, all 9 participants faced these bugs. 2 out of the 9 participants faced bug 3. Nobody faced the bug that the GenderMag, using GenderMag evaluation, the team had found, because nobody had a problem. Bug 5 and 6, everyone. So in total, if we calculate, if we just sum up the number of bugs and the number of participants, there was 20 inclusivity bugs that the users faced. In the diversity enhanced version, we see a marked reduction, right? Only 1 person out of 9 in bugs 1 and 2 and bugs 5 and 6. So we had a reduction of inclusivity bugs by about 90%. That's a big number. So it really helped. But we all started, like we had the Abby persona, right? So we wanted to see, it helped users in general, but what about Abby? So as part of the study, what we had also done was we have a GenderMag survey, Facet survey. So we can, there's a set of, I believe, 20 questions. And based on these 20 questions, for the pool of candidates that we are using the survey, we can kind of distinguish who are the Abbies and who are the Tims for each of these 5 facets. So for example, here's a question. I'm able to use unfamiliar technologies when I have built-in help for assistance. I have seen someone else using it. So this is for self-efficacy question facet. And here is the result of how the Abbeys and the Tims were in our participant pool. So something over the left, this is a pure Abbey. All 5 facets of this participant were Abbey-like, and we had one pure Tim. All 5 facets were Tim. Everyone else was a mix, right? And that's how we talk about it. This facets. It's not like there's a pure Abbey. It's not essentialism. It can be completely mixed. What we do in the facet is we kind of divide up and say like these people are Abbeys and these people over here are the Tims, just to kind of understand how Abbeys and Tims were helped or not. So let's take one particular example, bug 5 and 6, which was for the task 4. So the round oranges are self-reported Abbey facets from the survey. So participant P1 said they were an Abbey for motivation, for self-efficacy, information processing and learning style, but for risk averseness, they were a Tim. And then what I also did was, because we were doing the user study in the lab, we also recorded their activities and verbalizations. And we put a orange box when we observed them displaying Abbey-like facets, like, oh, I don't want to do this because I'm not sure what it would mean. Will it make it public? So we said, okay, that's a risk averseness facet, right? So based on the qualitative analysis, we saw then, did we have observed Abbey facet or observed Tim facet? So in this case, you can see in some cases in motivations, like why they are using the software, really because it was a user task, right? We had them come in and do the user study. We really can't make a decision about that, observation about that, but we could make observations about self-efficacy, information processing, and learning. And we saw that in 78% of cases, participants in the situation verbalizations aligned with their actual facet questionnaires. So now let's just go take a step back. So this is a bug 5 and 6. So there were 2 bugs, 2 inclusivity bugs. And what we did is we counted any time these boxes occurred for Abbey or for Tim. If you count all the orange borders or orange boxes, there were 17 Abbey facets that were implicated and 4 Tim facets. That means anytime a user, a participant, faced a bug and they had to think aloud, the verbalization was matching Abbey's or Tim's facet, we have counted them. So over here you see 17 versus 4. In the diversity enhanced, only participant P5 had any issue, right? So remember, this 9 out of 9 participant faced the bug in the pre-version and only 1 participant faced in the post-version. So it's 2 Abbeys and 1 Tim facets. So what we can say about equity and inclusion, right? The first is this inclusivity fixes that the team made based on the GenderMax evaluation made the product more inclusive, made the documentation more inclusive. And this is just documentation at this point, right? Whatever is on GitHub, readme contribute.md. So initially, there were 36 facets when you're counting all the bugs and all the orange boxes, basically. 36 of Abbey's facets were implicated versus 10, and it has reduced from 36 to 4 and from 10 to 1, right? It made the product inclusive for both Abbey and for Tim. It also made the project more equitable. So you can see the gap here, 36 versus 10, and the gap here is 4 versus 1, right? So it made the product more equitable. But we call him GenderMax. What about gender, you might be asking? So gender was a little more complicated because it was a small sample size. Here is, we had 9 and 9 participants, remember? 8 of them self-reported as women, 9 as men, and 1 was a self-described. And here is how they line up with the facets. So we had 1 woman who was a pure Abbey, 1 man who was a pure Tim. Everyone else was kind of, spread across, but more women were the Abbeys. If you can see this I don't know if you can see my cursor. I hope you can see my cursor. But the distribution of the yellow bars is like more towards the Abby, which are the women, and the distribution of the green bars are more towards the Tim. And this is why this makes it more gender inclusive. But because remember, previously the Abby facets were much more implicated than the Tim facets, and therefore there was a much more gender bias going on. And after the fix, it changed a lot for the Abbeys, like from 36 to 4 or something like that. So that made the product more gender inclusive. So a recap, GenderMag helps you find inclusivity bugs by kind of walking through your use case. It helps you find where those faults are actually located. And then using these facets, right? Motivations of the participant of IB could be that she doesn't want to make a code contribution. She wants to make some other contribution. So using the facet, you can fix the product. And here is a recap of thing again, like here, original 36 versus 4, it makes the product more inclusive and equitable. And because of this distribution, it's also helps with gender inclusion. So inclusivity fixes using GenderMag does not support one population at the expense of another. Instead, what we saw was it produced positive effects across the different facet values, right? So it is like the curb cuts idea again. Fixing it for Abby, they only did with one persona. Fixing it for Abby is actually also helped the Tims because the document was pretty hard to understand. So I've given an idea about how to find inclusivity bugs that are kind of causing the gender bias bugs, because the 5 facets that we have used, they come from empirical research that shows statistical differences in how problem solving styles cluster by gender. But you can think about other kinds of dimensions of inclusivity, right? Gender is only one dimension of diversity. So what we have come across is from GenderMag, we have created this meta method called the Inclusivity Mag or Inclusive Mag. So it has 3 components, and I'm going to walk you through each of these 3 components. The first component is, let's find a scope. What, as an inclusivity researcher or even practitioner, but we'll take some research skills here, what is the scope that you're interested in? First is select the technology type, right? Because that will determine what kind of papers and what kind of domains you're going to look into it, right? It could be anything with problem solving. It can be learning like we did with Canvas. It could be gaming. It could be anything, right? So pick some domain of interest, what technology you're interested in, and then pick the diversity dimension you're interested in. We started with GenderMax, so we kind of talked about these 5 facets that were backed by 5 empirical studies. You can pick other dimensions like age or education or socioeconomic status. And then you do a lot of research and analysis, right? So you kind of go through all the literature and find out what the research has shown, especially if you have any kind of controlled lab studies, because then you can see if there are statistical differences or not between, like, finding the facets, like what does, gender had this 2 learning style, what would make sense for age, for example. Okay, research analysis. So from this set of steps, you will kind of come up with the facets. These are like variables. What is your problem solving variable facet, and what the facet values are, which was like risk averse versus risk tolerant, high self-efficacy versus low self-efficacy. So you can see the facet being like a variable in programming and the values being your ends of the spectrum. GenderMag, we talked about risk facet. We have been working with lots of other researchers. There is an autism spectrum mag or neurodiversity mag where concentration is a facet. You have high concentration, ability to have high concentration, or very much divided small amounts of concentration, right? Fragmented concentration. If you're thinking of age, memory could be a facet, high recall versus low recall. We are working on SES mags, socioeconomic situation mag or socioeconomic status mag, where access to reliable technology is one of the facets, right? So based on the research literature, you can find out which is the variables of interest where you have seen differences in this dimension you're looking at, in this diversity dimension, and then you kind of find out the two ends of the spectrum, which would be your values. Here is the risk one. And then what you do is you construct the personas, right? From facets, you derive the persona. So for GenderMag, we said, okay, here is a multiple picture gender persona. We have Abby as the main face. We pick this picture. We put a woman's face over here because that was the major distribution. We do have a, gent's face, and these are the 5 facets we talked about. Here is one of them. So for concentration, you could have concentration level, like this kid is having ADHD, so it's tough to concentrate for this kid, whereas for her, she can multitask and keep concentration high, right? So you take those variables, those facets, and then you kind of design the ends of the spectrum by giving it some more information about what it is. So that's where you're deriving the personas, and then you will be using it maybe in different analytical processes. So these are all analytic process. That is, as designers, you are reviewing and inspecting and testing it out yourself before going to real users. So these are analytic processes. So in GenderMag, we used a specialized cognitive walkthrough where we're taking the persona and asking those questions about the sub goal, the pre-action question, and the post-action question. There are other possibilities. You can use heuristic evaluation, which is another way of having a checklist and seeing, how each of these software features help or deter these different values of your facets. Or you can do a cognitive walkthrough and simulation. Here is one of the students in our class. They used a simulation that was about retinal issues. So you have this spots. So where those spots are, and if that is occluding what the UI looks like. And then the third step is the application step, right? So you have your personas, you have things that can be customized, like we had all the background that can be customized. Like, Abby likes music. When they walk to their work, they listen to music, they like numbers. So you kind of give it like the practitioners can then customize the persona, select the scenario. Okay, select the scenario like we had, this particular newcomer to open source. Abby wants to make a contribution to Floss Coach. You select a scenario and then you kind of do the GenderMag, you fix it, and this is a loop, and that eventually gives you inclusive software. And your output is basically the inclusivity bug list where the persona you have chosen is struggling and just making it harder, right? Each inclusivity bug is not like a showstopper, but what it does is like it keeps adding up and eventually it becomes too big and people quit. So you find where the problem is and facets are deriving the fixes. Here is what we had. We had in this particular case that I used in open source, 46% of the questions had no bugs, 3% had general usability bugs, and 51% had inclusivity bugs. And when the team fixed it, pluses were basically it helped the Abby personas. Plus in blue it helped the Tim persona. So you can see how the facets drove the fixes, and the fixes made the product actually better for the participants. So thank you. This is my team, and there is also Margaret Bernard's team, with whom I work very closely. Most of the information is at gendermag.org. We have the kit as it is, like, you can just use the GenderMag and it gives you instruction on how to use the evaluation. We also have a open source tool, which is AID, Automated Inclusivity Detector, which right now we are working in a educational setting, for example, Canvas. So you can give the content of Canvas to it, and based on this decision rules that we have derived from the GenderMag 5 facets, it kind of keeps automatically evaluates content of your coursework and gives you a list of inclusivity bugs. Here is all the places GenderMag has been downloaded and used. We have people from Melbourne using it. So Australia is completely colored because of that. We just color. I think there were multiple, I think Melbourne and one more places, Monash and someone else had downloaded it. So we colored it blue. NSF has been our sponsor, so we are grateful to them. And yeah, that's it. So if you have any questions, I hope I'm on time. I'm
Yeah.
almost on time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anita. This is very interesting. This is quite outside of my domain. I work on the cybersecurity side of things or more on the meta side of things. But yeah, even for me, this was very interesting. And yeah, thank you
Even in cybersecurity, like, you have the what's called bro or something that you use to like find problems. I'm very curious because my understanding is cybersecurity is very, very men dominated. So I'm assuming those who are there, even if they're women, are also all Tims. It'll be really interesting to see for
Yeah,
first timers how it is. So you should
yeah, yeah,
try
yeah. Yeah, I think the balance is actually kind of, or the distribution is actually getting more balanced now. There are more women getting involved in the cybersecurity aspects, and I think one study was even saying that in terms of kind of like the executive level people, there are actually more women in the cybersecurity domain than men. Uh,
Okay,
anyway,
that's
so
pretty
any
cool.
questions from anyone? You can either raise your hand or just speak up. Okay, I'll start with my question. Maybe the others can think of their question in the meanwhile. Have you done any studies with products from kind of like big companies like, I don't know, like Google or Amazon or like Facebook or whatever to see whether in their case they end up with less or significantly less inclusivity bugs than let's say like these open source projects which are much more smaller than these big companies.
So yes, so we have worked with actually Microsoft, and this was when Margaret was doing a sabbatical over there. Um, this is in a Kai 2019 paper, and what they did was it was academic software, which is the Google Scholar equivalent, and it has been out there for a while, right? So they did do GenderMax. They did both from Abby and Tim's perspective, and then they did the user study with and after, and they did find, I don't remember the off the top of my head how what the percentage was of gender inclusivity bugs, but there was a decent amount. But what we call as the amazing graph, which I don't think I have here because I went open source on this talk, was women failed at twice the rate as men in that particular task that they had given, and then
Mm.
when they fixed it, the failures reduced by more than three-fourths, and then the gender gap completely disappeared because they had enough participants. So yes, so even in place like Microsoft, which they had done focus group studies and they had done user studies, they still found inclusivity bugs in there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
One other thing, since you're talking about Microsoft, after they did that, what they thought was really good was, because GenderMag evaluations take a little bit of, like, take quite a bit of time, because it's like 1 hour or 2 hour sessions lets you get through two or three scenarios only, because you're going each and every step, right? It's a lot
Mm.
of time, and that's why we have come up with this aid, the software to automatically do it. But what they found was really interesting is what they did was they actually used the personas. They clip it on their cubicles so that they can just think about the persona as they're designing, or even they
Mhm.
bring it to the design meeting so that they can channel Abby all the time
Yeah.
early in the process. And they were saying they were going to use the GenderMax Facet survey to not only get, so they're very good with getting diversity balancing, like women and men as user studies. But one of the things that could happen, all the women in the user study could be Tims, right? It doesn't need to be that facets completely aligned with men or women. So they were going to use the facets to not only get gender distribution but also cognitive diversity distribution. So I think that was really useful,
Mm.
because what
Yeah.
we were trying to say is like how to use components of GenderMag with the workflow that they already have in the
Yeah.
best possible way.
Yeah. 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 No, that's interesting. Um, any question from anyone else? I think we have time for one more question if there is any question from the audience. It seems like everyone is happy so far.
If somebody else has any questions, like for more information or something, just let me know, and I can then, talk to you offline.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Anita, for your very interesting talk, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope to see you all in the next seminar. Thank you.
All right, see you.
See you. Bye-bye.